There's been more security cooperation with the United States, with Australia, with Japan, and of course the Quad also delivers public goods. But India is also very conscious that the Quad not be seen as an explicitly anti-China grouping. That's been very, very important for India.
My name is Mark Frazier, professor of politics at the New School and co-director of the India-China Institute. I'm also a fellow at the National Committee's Public Intellectuals Program in the first cohort. I'm pleased to introduce our guests for today's interview exploring China-India relations. And very briefly, as their bios can be found in full on the website, first, Manjari Chatterjee Miller is Professor of International Relations and the inaugural Monk Chair in Global India at the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. Liu Zongyi is a Senior Fellow and Director of the Center for South Asia Studies at the Shanghai Institute for International Studies. So we will jump right in with the first question. This is in the context of what some have called a turnaround recently in Sino-Indian relations. We had the October 2024 agreement on border patrol protocols, of course, which had been a source of great tension going back to 2020. Maybe it timed conveniently for the BRICS summit a few weeks later. There was a subsequent meeting between Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi at that BRICS summit, which was held in Russia. And then since then, we've seen follow-on ministerial level talks that have, again, provided further evidence for those who claim that this all represents something of a turning point, a positive turning point in Sino-Indian relations. So I'll ask you both to start. In your view, what do you think led to this decision to move forward in their relationship? And what do you see as the most substantive areas of recent progress and also possible areas of future progress?
Sure, I can start. Is that okay, Professor Liu? All right. So it's interesting, Mark, that you talk about progress, and it's definitely progress. That's for sure, and it is positive. But I do think I'm very cautiously optimistic. One thing we need to keep in mind is that the border, is not the border that it was pre-2020, right? So the border has really changed for good in a substantive way. So you're looking at a situation where de-escalation is difficult just given the amount of troops and infrastructure buildup, et cetera, on both sides of the China-India border since 2020, right? So that's one of the things in the relationship that's really important to keep in mind as we put put that in context as we talk about the progress. The other thing I think that we need to keep in mind is that there is a fundamental distrust in the relationship, right? So I do think there's a trust deficit in both countries when it comes to relationship with each other. In India, that has existed for quite a while, and then 2020, made that worse. And I think in China, China has been really eyeing the India-United States relationship really very, very carefully and warily. And I would love to hear Professor Liu's take on that as well. So I think there's a trust deficit. So so it's not that the challenge has substantively, it's not that this challenge has substantially changed in any way with the talks. Um, it's also true that the old status quo is very unlikely to be restored, which is, what India would have preferred. Now, that doesn't mean that there hasn't been progress in the relationship, right? So the fact that there's the agreement to stabilize the border, right? And that again, we should keep that in mind that it's about stabilization, it's not about friendship. I think that's really important. And the other thing I would say on that is that Prime Minister Modi was just on a podcast with Lex Friedman, where he talked about the long history of friendship between China and India and how he really wants the relationship to be normal. And I think the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs just responded positively to that statement as well, on the podcast. So these are all small steps towards stabilization, even while we keep this context in mind. Now, in terms of what actually led to the deal, I mean, I think for India, I mean, other than the fact that that this is a very long border. It's a northern neighbor, it's a northern nuclear armed neighbor. So you definitely want the relationship to be stable. But for India, it's also about the economy, right? So India has an $83 billion deficit, trade deficit with China. India is heavily, heavily reliant on Chinese imports. And these imports are very important for India's Make in India strategy, which is about boosting Indian domestic manufacturing. It is, and the imports that India relies on are also in key industries. So, for example, telecommunications hardware or raw materials for its pharmaceutical industry. So, so that definitely was affected by the downturn in the relationship. And so the talks came at a time when, the Indian economy definitely needs trade with China, but also at a time when all of the wolf warrior issues that we were seeing with China was starting to be played down, right? Which also led to a possibility in the relationship, perhaps, that hadn't existed since 2020.
Thanks. Zongyi, your
Okay,
thoughts?
thank you very much. I agree with Manjari. The bilateral relations between China and India is very complicated. As we know, China's position on China-India relations has always been consistent, hoping that the border issue should not affect the bilateral relations. However, in the past decade, we can find the border issue has been instrumentalized by India side, I think. We can find that during Modi's second term, India had formed a great power strategy by actively promoting the formation of the U.S. So-called Indo-Pacific strategy. Then a situation of strategic competition between China and India, between China and the United States was formed. India want to use this, they called a strategic opportunity to contain China while attracting multinational corporations from the United States, Europe, Japan, and to transfer their industrial chains from China to India and transfer investment and technology, especially high tax, to promote the development of India's manufacturing industries, achieve the takeoff of India economy and rise of India as a great power. So this is India's great power strategy, I think, had been formed in the second term of Modi government. But India does not want to become a formal ally of the United States. Nor does it want to serve as a vanguard for the United States to contain China. So we can find in the Biden presidency, U.S.-India relations have reached a very high stance, very high position. With both sides established a global strategic partnership, India has become a non-treaty alliance partner of the United States, which, from my own understanding, which is a quasi-alliance relationship. India has already sided with the United States in the strategic competition between China and the United States, I think. But at the same time, we can find there have been many problems between the United States and India. India is very dissatisfied with the United States' attempt to control India and limits its influence in South Asia and the Indian Ocean region. So, especially in 2023, we can find there are a lot of disputes between India and the United States and Western countries. For example, the Modi question, the Adani issue, the Khalistan issue, and India thinks that the United States support Rahul Gandhi. And the largest one in 2024 is Hasina's downfall in Bangladesh. So it shows that there are a lot of problems between United States and India. So this situation has caused India's diplomacy to lose its flexibility between United States and China, which is detrimental to India. So I think India hopes to change this situation. So at least from November 2023, when I was invited to India to participate the dialogue with the India Foundation, I found the India side would like to restore China-India relation to a certain extent, to resume the direct flights between the two countries. And India side will, they said the India side would issue visas to Chinese and strengthen think tanks and people-to-people exchanges between the two countries. So it's in 2023. And in 2024, with the economic and social development pressures reflected by the changes in India domestic political situation reflected in the general election and the deterioration in relations between the Western countries and India. And India also think that Trump will win the election. That will cause a lot of effects to the international relations. So India, we can find India took more positive measures to ease tensions with China, including but not limited to the appointment of a former ambassador to China, Mr. Misri, as a foreign secretary. So I think there are a lot of reasons behind the change of bilateral relations.
Thank you. So the next question, I mean, you both mentioned the U.S. in your responses and the way in which China views the U.S.-India encroaching relations and maybe ways in which this apparent realignment under the Trump administration, realignment in global politics is well underway. But I guess what I'd like to do is to ask you each a question about kind of multilateral organizations like the Quad, like the BRICS that I mentioned earlier. So this is to Manjari about India being a member of the Quad and the BRICS and also balancing strategic partnerships, as referenced earlier, with both the US and China. How do you interpret India's current positioning between these two groups? And what does it signal about India's long-term diplomatic strategy?
You know, that's a great question, Mark. So I do want to respond to one thing that Zongyi said, which I thought was really interesting. So, I do think that there's a perception in China that the India United States strategic partnership is an alliance without being an alliance. It's a non-treaty set quasi alliance. That's not how it's seen in India. I mean, I think the United States really wishes that were true, right? I mean, the US would love to to draw India in more closely. I think that is a little bit of a projection and wishful thinking because in India, India's been very, very careful to not have that because it's very wary about that, specifically because of China. And the reason I mention this is because this is important with the multilateral groupings, right? So I mean, India is the most reluctant member of the Quad, right? If I want to put it that way. And it's the most reluctant member of the Quad because for a long time it was because India was very, very worried about the Quad being seen as anti-China. Now, in the past few years, India has definitely integrated more into the Quad, bought more into the concept of the Quad. There's been more security cooperation with the United States, with Australia, with Japan, and of course, the Quad also delivers public goods. But India is also very conscious that the Quad not be seen as an explicitly anti-China grouping, right? So that's been very, very important for India. And part of it is because, I mean, if you think about it just in terms of security calculations, one of the reasons that India is careful is that India is the only Quad country with Chinese troops on its border, right? So for it, that caution is really important. And so with the BRICS, I think is a slightly different issue. So I think with the BRICS, so first of all, I'll say that with the BRICS, the West has been writing the epitaph of the BRICS for years, right? But the BRICS countries have together, you almost have 3.3 billion people, right? They represent 3.3 billion people, which is over 40% of the global population. And the BRICS economies themselves also account for almost, nearly 37%, I'd like to say, of global GDP based on purchasing power parity. And now, of course, you have the addition of Iran, the UAE, perhaps even Saudi Arabia, which means the BRICS could even control nearly half of all oil production worldwide, right? Now, these are some significant statistics. So, for India, the BRICS started off as this, this protest, if you will, about the West's dominance of global governance structures. Uh, but now for India, the BRICS has become another way that it can bridge this divide between global South, right, and the West. So for India, the BRICS should not be anti-Western. India is playing a very, very careful role in balancing how it sees its position among global South nations, and then how it sees its positions with Western nations. And it's in a very unique position, right? Because, Russia doesn't have that position. China doesn't have that position of that bridge. And so India is very, very um, careful to play into that. That's become increasingly important for the Indian government under Modi. And we saw that, for example, in spades in the G20. But for why India has even stayed in the BRICS, I mean, even before this whole issue of the India-United States strategic partnership came up, even before all of this talk of bridging came up, the fact is, institutions offer different ways of working, right? And one of the things that the BRICS offered India was a way to work with China, for example, or even Russia, on soft issues that perhaps it couldn't manage so well in its bilateral relationship. So if you take the issue of drug trafficking, for example, right? The BRICS provides a way to continue that cooperation with China, even while the bilateral relationship itself is at another. So I think institutions, not just the BRICS, but institutions in general, can offer those avenues for cooperation, and that's one of the reasons it stayed in it for so many years. But more and more, it's become this bridge platform for India, which plays very well with India's diplomatic strategy of strategic autonomy, for example.
Thank you. So Zongyi, how does China view the BRICS now that India is now that India is participating in both BRICS and the Quad?
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's an interesting question. Actually, from my perspective, I don't think Quad and BRICS are similar. They are two completely different cooperation mechanisms. Quad is the core of the so-called Indo-Pacific strategy, and the United States hope to build the Quad into Asia's NATO. So essentially it's an exclusive military group from the United States. BRICS is a cooperative organization of the global South countries, which is open. Its initial establishment in 2029 was aimed to change the unreasonable international financial order and promoting the reform of the international financial system at that time. Now, it's mainly focused on economic cooperation among the countries in global south, which also coordinating on global and regional issues, on some strategic issues. However, global strategic cooperation is not the main focus. Quad is not conducive to regional peace and stability, while BRICS aims to promote common development and regional cooperation, and promote the regional stability and prosperity. China believes that BRICS is an international cooperation mechanism as important as G20 and SCO. In my personal opinion, actually, from my own, from my humble observation, India is a troublemaker in the BRICS. It's hindering its development, and while India played an active role in the Quad because its presence has prevented it from becoming Asia's NATO, I think. So India's behavior in international organizations is very interesting. You can find. Thank you.
Thanks. We're running short on time, as always happens in these fascinating conversations. But I did want to have us talk. You both mentioned in your responses to the first question about India's strategy to bolster and become a manufacturing power, and the question, especially in technology and ICT. And in the broader context, my question is about this talk of shifting supply chains from China to India. We know from the meeting between Trump and Modi in February, there are now U.S. efforts to divert supply chains explicitly toward India. And so my question to both of you is what are the prospects of supply chains actually realigning and India taking a pivotal position in critical and high technology supply chains? What are the biggest challenges that India faces currently in kind of capitalizing on this moment in which the geopolitical drivers are pushing economic ties and supply chains toward India? So maybe we'll start with Manjari, please.
Sure. Yeah, so I think that, the diverting supply chains away from China toward India was a big plank of the Biden administration. And it was something that dovetailed really well with Prime Minister Modi's Make in India strategy, where, for years, India's been trying to move it to boost its domestic manufacturing sector. The problem remains that this is a really difficult strategy to achieve because there is a large cost to doing business in India. Despite the government welcoming, this whole strategy of diverting supply chains away from China towards India, India is a very difficult market to enter, right? So let's take something like semiconductor manufacturing, which actually needs very large supplies of water and electricity. So that in turn then requires reliable infrastructure that India just doesn't have currently. So, for example, you can look at the 2023 deal. There was supposed to be this $19.5 billion semiconductor partnership between Foxconn and then the Indian conglomerate Vedanta, and that collapsed. That deal collapsed. And this isn't just about the production of semiconductors. So India, of course, the United States is now also becoming more protectionist under President Trump. But India has historically been very protectionist, and it applies tariffs to many goods. And there are very, stringent regulatory issues that pose other barriers. So, Japanese auto companies, for example, complain that there are very high import duties on tires. Nippon Steel, had its shipments blocked for months because of by Indian customs because of regulatory issues. And I read just the other day somewhere that out of if you have 10 Japanese companies inquire about doing business in India, only about one actually manages to enter the market and do business. And I think the last warning sign with respect to this, is with regard to Apple, right? So there was this big push that Apple would move its manufacturing from China to India. But if you look at the divergence, I mean, right now about 15% of Apple's production is in India, but Apple had initially targeted 25% by 2024. Right, and that didn't happen. So I think the will is there, but because of infrastructure, because of India's history of protectionism, because of regulatory issues, I think it's still very difficult for foreign companies to actually enter the market and produce these goods that both the United States and India wants.
Thank you. Zongyi, what are your thoughts on the supply
Okay,
chain
thank you
question?
very much. It's a very important question, I think, because I just published a report on the so-called India's alternative to China strategy. I cooperated with my colleagues. I just published this report. You can find it in our website. We find that in the past years, I think it's normal for India would like to develop their manufacturing sector and develop their economy. India is so large a country and have so large population. It's natural they would like to develop their own manufacturing sector. But from my perspective, I think, for example, the East Asian countries, including China, they just would like to accept the shift of supply chain and value chain from other more developed countries such as Japan, South Korea, and the United States. It's a natural process, but India would like to get the global supply chain and value chain shift from developed countries, not from some developed countries like China. Actually, there are some grids of economic development. For India, I think India should accept the shift of global value chain from China, not from developed countries. But they have a very large ambition, but their behavior is not so good, I think. The main problem is that for India, now you can find the Modi government is alliance of Brahmin and Banya, these groups. They would like to control the whole Indian market. They don't want to share with other countries, including China, including United States. So they cannot open their market. They cannot let foreign investment into India and compete with local companies. So it's caused a lot of problems. But we can find in the past several years, there's some sporadic breakthroughs by India in some industrial fields, such as the smartphone and other, and such as the manufacturing of tools. But most of the sectors, most of the fields cannot be developed. So I think it's a problem of India. It's not a problem of other countries. If India would like to become economic power, it should cooperate with Eastern Asian countries first, and then second with cooperate with United States and other developed countries, I think. Thank you.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing your thoughts and insights today. I think we have some warranted caution in thinking about this as some kind of a major turning point in Sino-Indian relations, given the trust deficit that Manjari alluded to, and Zongyi also mentioned in his remarks. I think we also have some warranted caution in assuming that there will be a rapid realignment of supply chains. Though I think it's very interesting to consider the extent to which India could achieve some of its goals in Made in India by relying on Asian countries rather than on the developed countries, as Zongyi mentioned. So I'd also like to thank the National Committee staff members behind the scenes who've made today's interview possible. We hope that those of you who have tuned in today found the interview both interesting and informative, and that you will join us for future National Committee programming. Thank you all again.